The grand ballroom of the luxurious estate was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversation. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests who moved gracefully through the space. It was a night of glamour and sophistication, where everyone seemed to be trying to outshine one another. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly polished wood, a reminder of the wealth that surrounded them. In one corner of the room stood a magnificent piano. It was a Steinway, its glossy black surface reflecting the light, like a mirror. Its presence commanded attention, and many of the guests couldn't resist stopping by to admire it or take a quick selfie in front of it. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a symbol of status, a piece of art worth more than most people in the room would earn in a lifetime. It belonged to Emily Dawson, the young heiress hosting the gala. She had inherited her family's fortune, but also their love for fine things, and tonight, she wanted to show off her prized possession. Emily was the center of attention, as always. Dressed in a flowing gown that shimmered with every step she took, she glided through the crowd, greeting her guests with practiced charm. Her smile was radiant, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something distant about her, as if she were constantly aware of her own superiority, but no one dared to question it. After all, Emily was rich, beautiful, and untouchable, or so she liked to think. While the guests mingled and sipped champagne, a man in a plain gray uniform worked quietly in the background. His name was Daniel Carter, and he was the janitor. He wasn't part of the glamorous world these people inhabited. Instead, his job was to clean up after them, to make sure the floors stayed spotless and the trash disappeared without anyone noticing. Daniel kept his head down as he moved through the room, careful not to draw attention to himself. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. But despite his efforts to remain invisible, Daniel couldn't help but notice the piano. It was impossible to ignore. He had always been drawn to music, even though life hadn't given him many chances to pursue it. As a child, he'd spent hours listening to classical compositions on an old radio, imagining what it would feel like to sit at a piano and create those sounds himself. Now, standing just a few feet away from such a stunning instrument, he felt a strange pull, a longing he hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. He glanced around to see if anyone was watching him. Most of the guests were too busy chatting or admiring themselves in the ornate mirrors lining the walls. No one seemed to care about the janitor in the corner. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped closer to the piano. He reached out slowly, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered above the smooth, polished surface. Before he could touch it, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" Daniel froze, his hand still suspended, in midair. He turned to see Emily standing there, her arms crossed and her expression icy. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her blue eyes sparkled with irritation. She looked at him like he was something unpleasant she had just stepped on. "How dare you touch my piano?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to catch the attention of several nearby guests. They turned to see what was happening, their curious gazes settling on Daniel. Some smirked, others whispered behind their hands, and a few openly laughed. Daniel felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He quickly pulled his hand back, mumbling an apology. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean any harm." But Emily wasn't satisfied. She tilted her head, studying him with a mixture of disdain and disbelief. "Do you even know how much this piano is worth?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "It's worth more than everything you own combined." The comment stung, but Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the shadows and escape the weight of everyone's judgment. But before he could retreat, Emily added, "Honestly, some people have no respect." Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. The other guests nodded in agreement, clearly enjoying the spectacle. To them, Daniel was nothing more than a janitor, a nobody who had overstepped his boundaries. They returned to their conversations, leaving him alone once again. As Daniel walked away, he tried to push the incident out of his mind. He reminded himself that it didn't matter what they thought of him. He had a job to do and he needed to focus on that. But as he passed by the piano one last time, he couldn't help but glance at it longingly. There was something about the way it sat there, silent and majestic, that stirred something deep inside him. It wasn't just an object to be admired. It was a gateway to a world he had almost forgotten. "It's just an instrument," Daniel muttered under his breath, almost to himself. But Emily heard him. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "Just an instrument?" she repeated, her voice tinged with mockery. "You must really think you're something special to say that." Daniel didn't respond. He simply continued walking, disappearing into the shadows where he belonged. Or so everyone thought. Little did they know the night was far from over, and soon they would discover that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most extraordinary talents hide in the most unexpected places. Daniel tried to leave the room as quickly as possible, hoping to put the awkward moment behind him. He could still feel the weight of Emily's words, and the amused stares of the guests burning into his back. It was humiliating, but he told himself it didn't matter. He had dealt with worse in his life. Still, something about the way Emily had dismissed him gnawed at him. She acted like he wasn't even human, like he was just some invisible figure there to clean up after her perfect world. But before he could make it to the door, Emily's voice stopped him in his tracks. "Wait!" she called out, her tone sharp and commanding. Daniel turned around reluctantly, unsure of what she wanted now. Hadn't she already said enough? Emily walked toward him, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her expression was smug, almost playful, as if she were about to deliver the punchline to a joke. When she reached him, she crossed her arms and tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "You said it's just an instrument," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you even know how to play?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He hesitated, glancing at the piano for a brief second before looking back at her. Some of the other guests had noticed the exchange and were now watching curiously, eager to see how this would play out. A few snickered quietly, clearly expecting Daniel to stumble over his words or admit defeat. After all, what kind of janitor could possibly know how to play a Steinway? For a moment, Daniel considered walking away without answering. He didn't owe these people anything, especially not an explanation. But then something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the mocking tone in Emily's voice, or maybe it was the memories that came flooding back. The hours spent practicing on an old upright piano in his childhood home. The way music had once been, his escape from a difficult life. Whatever it was, Daniel found himself standing a little straighter, his shoulders squaring as he met Emily's gaze. "I used to," he replied softly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. The simplicity of his answer surprised everyone, including Emily. She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. For someone who seemed so ordinary, there was a quiet confidence in his tone that made her pause. "Used to," she echoed, her smirk returning. "Well, that sounds like a challenge." She gestured dramatically toward the piano as if presenting it to him. "Go ahead, prove it. Show us all how talented you are." Her words were meant to be condescending, but they only fueled Daniel's resolve. He glanced at the piano again, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling up inside him. It had been years since he'd last played, and he wasn't sure if he still remembered how, but something about the situation felt right. Like fate was giving him a chance to reclaim a part of himself he thought he'd lost forever. Daniel hesitated for a moment longer, then stepped forward. The crowd parted silently as he approached the piano, their eyes following his every move. He sat down on the bench, adjusting it slightly to find the right height. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly as he took a deep breath. The room grew quiet, the hum of conversation fading into silence. Even Emily stopped smirking, her curiosity getting the better of her. And then Daniel began to play. The first notes rang out, soft and haunting, filling the room with a melody that seemed to come from another world. It was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, one of the most iconic pieces in classical music. Daniel's hands moved effortlessly across the keys, each note precise and deliberate. The music swelled, building in intensity until it filled every corner of the ballroom. It was beautiful, raw, and deeply emotional, as if Daniel were pouring his entire soul into the performance. The guests were stunned. They stood frozen, their mouths slightly open as they listened to the man they had mocked just moments ago transform into something extraordinary. The same people who had laughed at him now watched in awe, unable to look away. Even the waitstaff paused what they were doing, leaning against the walls to take in the unexpected magic unfolding before them. Emily was speechless. She had expected Daniel to fumble or embarrass himself further, but instead, he had delivered a performance that left her breathless. Her arms, which had been crossed in defiance, slowly dropped to her sides. Her initial mockery gave way to genuine admiration, and for the first time that night she forgot about her own status and privilege. All that mattered was the music. As Daniel transitioned seamlessly into Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9 No. 2-4, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. The tension and judgment that had hung in the air earlier dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of wonder. The soft flowing melody seemed to wrap around everyone, drawing them into Daniel's world. It wasn't just the technical skill that captivated them. It was the emotion behind it, the way Daniel played as if he were telling a story only he could understand. By the time he finished, the room was utterly silent. For a few seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then, as if waking from a dream, the guests erupted into applause. They clapped enthusiastically, some even cheering or whistling. People exchanged astonished glances, their earlier disdain replaced by respect and admiration. Daniel sat motionless for a moment, his hands resting lightly on the keys, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Emily was the first to approach him. She walked slowly, her high heels clicking softly against the floor. When she reached the piano, she stopped and looked at Daniel with wide eyes. There was no trace of arrogance or mockery in her expression now, only awe and a hint of guilt. That was incredible, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. Daniel smiled faintly, though there was a sadness in his eyes. It's been a long time since I've played, he admitted, his voice quiet but calm. I wasn't sure I still could. Well, you definitely can, Emily replied, shaking her head in disbelief. How did you learn to play like that? Daniel hesitated, glancing down at his hands. He wasn't used to sharing his story, especially not with strangers. But something about the way Emily was looking at him now, without judgment or superiority, made him want to explain. I grew up loving music, he began, his voice soft but steady. My mom worked hard to give me lessons when I was younger. I got pretty good, even earned scholarships to study at conservatories, but he trailed off, his gaze distant as memories resurfaced. But what? Emily prompted gently, sensing there was more to the story. Daniel sighed, his smile fading. Life happened. My mom got sick and I had to drop everything to take care of her. Music became less important than survival. Eventually, I stopped playing altogether. I never forgot how much I loved it, though. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Emily felt a pang of guilt for the way she had treated him earlier. She realized now that she had judged him based on his appearance and job title, never stopping to consider that he might have a story worth hearing. Looking at him now, she saw a man who had endured hardships she could barely imagine, yet still carried a spark of passion within him. You're amazing, she said sincerely, her voice filled with admiration. I'm sorry for the way I acted before. I was wrong. Daniel nodded, accepting her apology without hesitation. It's okay, he said simply. You weren't the first person to underestimate me, and you probably won't be the last. The air room was buzzing with energy as the guests continued to applaud and congratulate Daniel. Some asked him questions about his background, while others begged him to play another piece. For the first time that night, Daniel didn't feel invisible. Instead, he felt seen, and not just as a janitor, but as a musician, a storyteller, and a human being with dreams and struggles of his own. As the evening wore on, Emily stayed close to Daniel, asking more about his life and his love for music. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something rare and extraordinary, a reminder that talent and greatness can exist in the most unexpected places. And as she listened to him talk, she realized that this chance encounter might change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. The applause slowly began to die down, but the energy in the room remained electric. People were still talking about Daniel's performance, their voices filled with excitement and disbelief. Some of the guests approached him to shake his hand or offer compliments, while others stood back, whispering among themselves. It was clear that no one had expected such a breathtaking display of talent from someone they had dismissed so easily just moments before. Emily stayed close to Daniel, her earlier arrogance completely gone. She watched as he interacted with the crowd, answering questions politely but keeping his answers short. Despite the attention, Daniel seemed uncomfortable being the center of it all. He wasn't used to this kind of spotlight, and it showed in the way he kept glancing toward the door as if considering an escape. Emily noticed this and stepped in to help. "Everyone give him some space," she said firmly, raising her hands to quiet the growing chatter. "He's not here to entertain us all night." Her tone was gentle but commanding, and the guests reluctantly backed off, though many lingered nearby, clearly unwilling to leave just yet. Once the immediate attention subsided, Emily turned to Daniel with a warm smile. "Thank you for playing," she said sincerely. "I can't tell you how much it meant to hear something so beautiful." Daniel nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," he replied, his voice calm but distant. He wasn't sure what to make of the sudden shift in Emily's attitude. Just minutes ago she had mocked him, and now she was treating him like an equal, or even better. It was confusing, but he appreciated her effort to make things right. As the two of them stood together near the piano, Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I feel like I owe you an apology," she admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I judged you unfairly earlier, and I'm sorry for that. You deserve respect, especially after what you just did." Daniel looked at her, surprised by her honesty. He hadn't expected her to admit fault so openly, especially in front of others. "It's okay," he said after a pause. "You weren't the first person to underestimate me, and you probably won't be the last. I've learned to live with it." Emily frowned, shaking her head. "That doesn't make it right," she insisted. "People shouldn't have to deal with that kind of treatment. You're incredibly talented, Daniel. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Her words struck a chord with him. For years, Daniel had buried his love for music, telling himself it didn't matter anymore. Life had forced him to prioritize survival over passion, and he had convinced himself that his dreams were out of reach. But hearing Emily acknowledge his talent and validate it made him wonder if maybe he had been wrong to give up on music entirely. Before either of them could say anything else, one of Emily's friends approached them. It was Laura, a tall woman with curly hair and a bright smile. She had been watching the entire scene unfold and couldn't contain her enthusiasm. "That was absolutely incredible," she exclaimed, directing her comment at Daniel. "Seriously, where did you learn to play like that?" Daniel chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I took lessons when I was younger," he explained. "My mom worked hard to make sure I could keep learning even when money was tight." Laura's eyes widened in amazement. "Well, your mom must be so proud of you," she said warmly. Then, turning to Emily, she added, "You should invite him to perform at your next event. He'd be perfect." Emily's face lit up at the suggestion. She hadn't thought of that idea herself, but now that Laura mentioned it, it seemed obvious. Turning back to Daniel, she asked, "Would you consider performing again? Maybe at another gathering? I'd love for more people to hear you play." Daniel hesitated, caught off guard by the invitation. He hadn't played in public in years, and the thought of doing so again made him nervous. At the same time, however, he couldn't deny the thrill he had felt while playing tonight. For those few minutes, he had forgotten about everything else. The long hours at work, the struggles of daily life, and simply lost himself in the music. It was a feeling he hadn't realized how much he missed. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I haven't performed in a long time. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." Emily nodded, understanding his hesitation. "I get it," she said gently. "But if you ever change your mind, I'd be happy to arrange it." "You have a gift, Daniel, and gifts like that shouldn't go unnoticed." Her sincerity touched him, and though he didn't commit to anything right away, he found himself considering the possibility. Maybe it was time to revisit the part of himself he had locked away for so long. After all, music had always been his refuge, his way of coping with the challenges life threw at him. Perhaps it could be again. As the night went on, Emily continued to stay by Daniel's side, introducing him to other guests and making sure he felt comfortable. She introduced him not as the janitor, but as a brilliant pianist, emphasizing his talent rather than his job title. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by Daniel, who began to see her in a different light. Beneath her polished exterior, there was kindness and a willingness to admit when she was wrong, qualities he hadn't expected to find in someone like her. By the time the gala started winding down, Daniel was exhausted but grateful. He had come to the event expecting nothing more than a routine night of work, and instead, he had experienced something extraordinary. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not for what he did or where he came from, but for who he truly was. When the last of the guests began leaving, Emily walked Daniel to the door. "Thank you again for sharing your music with us," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "It meant a lot to me, and I think it meant a lot to everyone else too." Daniel smiled faintly, meeting her gaze. "Thank you for giving me the chance," he replied, "and for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Emily shook her head, smiling back. "Anyone who hears you play would believe in you," she said. "Don't forget that." As Daniel stepped outside into the cool night air, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The encounter with Emily had reminded him that life was full of surprises, that sometimes the most unexpected moments could lead to something meaningful. And as he walked home under the starlit sky, he found himself humming a melody, the notes flowing effortlessly through his mind. Back inside the ballroom, Emily stood alone for a moment, reflecting on the evening. She had started the night focused on showing off her wealth and status, but now she realized she had gained something far more valuable: perspective. Meeting Daniel had opened her eyes to the fact that true worth wasn't measured by money or possessions. It was found in the connections we make and the stories we share. With a small smile, Emily turned off the lights and closed the door behind her. The grand piano sat silently in the corner, its glossy surface reflecting the dim glow of the moonlight streaming through the windows. Tonight, it had served as more than just an instrument. It had been a bridge between two worlds, bringing together two people who might never have crossed paths otherwise. And as both Daniel and Emily drifted off to sleep that night, they carried with them the memory of something rare and beautiful. Reminder that sometimes the simplest moments can leave the deepest impact. The days following the gala passed quickly, but the memory of that night lingered in Daniel's mind. He went about his usual routine, cleaning floors, emptying trash bins, and ensuring the venue stayed spotless. But his thoughts often drifted back to the piano. The way his fingers had glided across the keys, the melodies that seemed to flow naturally from his soul. It was as if a part of him had been awakened after years of silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to dream again. Emily, too, found herself thinking about Daniel more than she expected. She had always prided herself on being self-assured and confident, yet the encounter with him had shaken her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just his talent that impressed her. It was his humility, his quiet strength, and the way he carried himself despite the challenges life had thrown at him. She realized how much she had taken for granted, the privileges she'd grown up with, the opportunities handed to her without effort, and it made her want to do something meaningful. A few days later, Emily decided to visit Daniel at the venue where he worked. She arrived early in the morning before the building opened, to the public carrying 2 cups of coffee. When she spotted him mopping the floor near the ballroom, she approached him with a smile. "Morning," she said brightly, holding out one of the cups. "I brought you something." Daniel looked up, surprised to see her. He set the mop aside and accepted the coffee, his expression softening. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to talk to you," Emily replied, her tone casual but sincere. "About performing again. I know you said you weren't sure, but I really think you should consider it." Daniel sighed, leaning against the mop handle. "It's not that simple," he admitted. "Playing in front of people. It's been a long time since I've done that. I'm not even sure I still have it in me." "You do," Emily said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I saw it myself. And so did everyone else who was there that night. You don't lose a gift like that, Daniel. It's a part of you." Her words gave him pause. He appreciated her encouragement, but the idea of stepping back into the world of music felt daunting. "Even if I could play, why would anyone care?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "I'm just a janitor. People like me don't get second chances." "That's not true," Emily countered immediately. "You deserve this chance, Daniel. More than that, the world deserves to hear your music. Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden." Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared down at the coffee cup in his hands, lost in thought. Part of him wanted to believe her, to trust that maybe he could reclaim a piece of the life he had left behind. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of struggle and disappointment, wasn't ready to let go of its defenses. Seeing his hesitation, Emily tried a different approach. "Look, I'm not saying you have to decide right now," she said gently. "But I'm organizing another event next month, a charity gala for arts education programs. And I'd love for you to be a part of it. Think about it, okay? No pressure." Daniel nodded slowly, appreciating her patience. "I'll think about it," he promised. "That's all I can say for now." "Fair enough," Emily replied with a small smile. "Just know that I mean it. This isn't charity or pity. It's an opportunity for you to share your gift with people who will truly appreciate it." As Emily left, Daniel couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Her words echoed in his mind throughout the day, reminding him of the passion he once had for music. That evening, when he returned home, he sat at the small keyboard he kept tucked away in the corner of his apartment. It was old and slightly out of tune, but it was enough to rekindle the spark within him. Slowly, tentatively, he began to play. Over the next few weeks, Daniel practiced whenever he had free time. At first, it was awkward. His fingers stumbled over the keys, and some of the pieces he used to play effortlessly now felt foreign. But as the days went by, his confidence grew. He remembered the joy music had brought him as a child, the way it had helped him escape the hardships of his early life. He also thought about Emily's invitation and the possibility of performing again. Not because he owed it to anyone, but because it might give him a chance to reconnect with a part of himself he had missed deeply. Meanwhile, Emily threw herself into planning the charity gala. She worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect, from the guest list to the decorations. But her main focus was Daniel. She arranged for a professional technician to tune the Steinway piano, ensuring it would sound its best for his performance. She also reached out to local media outlets, hoping to generate interest in the event. Though she knew Daniel might feel uncomfortable with the attention, she believed his story deserved to be shared. When the day of the gala finally arrived, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Emily had lent him a suit, insisting that he look the part of a performer. As he stood backstage, adjusting his tie and taking deep breaths to calm himself, Emily appeared beside him. "You ready?" she asked, her eyes filled with encouragement. "As ready as I'll ever be," Daniel replied, managing a nervous smile. "You're going to be amazing," Emily assured him. "Just remember why you're doing this, for yourself, not for anyone else." Her words grounded him, reminding him of the journey that had brought him here. When his name was announced and he walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. Daniel took a seat at the piano, his heart pounding as he placed his hands on the keys. For a brief moment he closed his eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. Then, he began to play. The music flowed effortlessly, each note resonating through the room with clarity and emotion. Daniel chose a mix of classical pieces and original compositions, weaving together a performance that was both technically impressive and deeply personal. The audience listened in rapt silence, captivated by the raw honesty of his playing. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. As Daniel stood to take a bow, the room erupted into thunderous applause. People cheered and whistled, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Emily watched from the wings, tears streaming down her face. She had known Daniel was talented, but seeing him shine like this was beyond anything she had imagined. After the performance, guests lined up to congratulate Daniel, many expressing how moved they were by his music. Reporters asked for interviews and strangers praised him for his courage and artistry. Through it all, Daniel remained humble, thanking everyone graciously while keeping his focus on the music itself. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Emily found Daniel sitting alone near the piano. "So," she said, joining him with a grin, "how does it feel to be a star?" Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'm no star," he replied. "I'm just a guy who loves music." "Well, you're a guy who loves music who happens to be incredibly talented," Emily corrected him. "And don't forget it." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, reflecting on the evening. For Daniel, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could embrace his passion without fear or hesitation. For Emily, it reinforced the importance of looking beyond appearances and recognizing the value in others. Together, they had created something extraordinary, proving that sometimes the most unlikely connections can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. As they parted ways that night, both Daniel and Emily knew their lives had changed in profound ways. What had started as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a friendship built on mutual respect and admiration. And though their paths might diverge in the future, the bond they shared and the music that brought them together would always remain a cherished part of their stories. The success of the charity gala marked a turning point for Daniel. It wasn't just the applause or the praise that stayed with him. It was the realization that he still had something valuable to offer the world. Music, which had once been his refuge, now became a bridge connecting him to others. In the weeks following the event, Daniel found himself busier than ever. Emily had kept her promise to help spread the word about his talent, and soon, requests began pouring in. Local community centers invited him to perform at their events. Schools asked if he would give talks to students, and even a small arts organization reached out to see if he'd be interested in teaching. At first, Daniel hesitated. Teaching was unfamiliar territory for him, and the idea of standing in front of a classroom full of eager faces felt intimidating. But Emily encouraged him, reminding him how much he had already inspired others simply by sharing his story. "You don't have to be perfect," she told him one afternoon over coffee. "Just be yourself. That's what people respond to." With her support, Daniel agreed to try. He started small, offering free lessons to children from underserved neighborhoods. Many of these kids had never touched a piano before, let alone imagined they could create music themselves. Daniel understood their struggles. He had grown up in similar circumstances, and he poured his heart into helping them discover the joy of playing. He taught not just technique, but also patience, perseverance, and the importance of believing in oneself. The impact was immediate and profound. Parents who had initially dismissed music as an impractical hobby began to see its value when they witnessed the confidence it gave their children. Teachers reported improvements in focus and discipline among the students who attended Daniel's classes. Even the kids themselves noticed changes within. They walked taller, spoke louder, and carried themselves with a newfound sense of pride. Emily watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. She had always cared about giving back to the community, but until meeting Daniel, she hadn't fully understood the power of individual stories to inspire change. Seeing how his journey resonated with others made her rethink her own role in the world. She decided to use her resources and influence to advocate for arts education programs, partnering with local organizations to secure funding and raise awareness. Her family's wealth, which she had once viewed primarily as a source of privilege, became a tool for making a difference. Their partnership, though unconventional, worked seamlessly. Emily handled the logistics, organizing events, securing venues, and reaching out to potential sponsors. Daniel focused on the creative side, crafting performances and mentoring young musicians. Together, they formed a team that balanced ambition with authenticity, driven by a shared belief in the transformative power of art. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Emily joined Daniel for dinner at a cozy cafe near the venue. The air was warm, and the streets buzzed with the energy of summer. They sat outside under twinkling string lights, sipping iced tea as they reflected on the progress they had made. "You know," Emily said thoughtfully, "I never expected any of this when I first met you." Daniel chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Me neither. If someone had told me a few months ago that I'd be teaching kids and performing in front of crowds again, I wouldn't have believed them, and yet here we are," Emily replied with a smile. "It's funny how life works sometimes. One moment can change everything." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, it really can. I guess I owe you for pushing me to take that chance." "Don't give me too much credit," Emily said lightly, waving a hand. "You did all the hard work. I just gave you a nudge." "A pretty big nudge," Daniel countered, grinning. "But seriously, thank you. I don't think I could have done any of this without your support." Emily's smile softened, her gaze steady. "We helped each other, Daniel. You reminded me of things I'd forgotten, like how important it is to look beyond the surface and see people for who they really are. And hopefully I helped remind you of your own worth." Her words hung in the air between them, simple yet deeply meaningful. For both of them, the past few months had been about more than music or charity. It had been about rediscovery. Daniel had reclaimed a part of himself he thought he'd lost, while Emily had learned to redefine what truly mattered in her life. Their friendship, forged through mutual respect and vulnerability, had become a cornerstone of their growth as the weeks turned into months. Their efforts continued to gain momentum. Emily organized a larger-scale benefit concert featuring Daniel alongside other local artists. The event drew attention from media outlets, shining a spotlight on the importance of accessible arts education. Tickets sold out quickly, and donations poured in, allowing several schools to establish music programs where none had existed before. On the night of the concert, Daniel took the stage wearing the same suit Emily had lent him for the first gala. This time, however, he felt different. He no longer saw himself as just a janitor or a reluctant performer. He was a musician, a teacher, a mentor, and an advocate for those who might otherwise go unheard. As he played, he dedicated each piece to someone who had supported him along the way: his late mother, whose sacrifices had allowed him to pursue music; the students who reminded him daily of the resilience of the human spirit; and Emily, whose belief in him had sparked this incredible journey. When the final note faded into silence, the audience erupted into applause once again. But this time, Daniel didn't bow immediately. Instead, he gestured for Emily to join him on stage. Surprised but honored, she stepped forward, her cheeks flushed as the crowd cheered even louder. Together, they stood side by side, a testament to the power of collaboration and trust. Backstage afterward, Emily hugged Daniel tightly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're amazing," she whispered. "Do you realize how many lives you've changed?" Daniel shook his head, humbled by her words. "Not just mine," he replied. "Yours too." They shared a quiet laugh, knowing neither of them could have predicted where their paths would lead. What had started as a moment of mockery had evolved into a partnership rooted in empathy, determination, and hope. Through music, they had created opportunities for countless others, and in doing so they had transformed their own lives as well. As they left the venue together, the city skyline glowing in the distance, Daniel paused for a moment to look up at the stars. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my dream was over, that I'd missed my chance." "And now?" Emily prompted, glancing at him curiously. Daniel smiled, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "Now I know it's never too late, not if you're willing to take the next step." Emily nodded, her own smile mirroring his. "That's the thing about music, and life, really. It's all about finding the right notes, even when you least expect it." With that, they walked off into the night, ready to face whatever came next. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they wouldn't face them alone. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest acts of courage and the willingness to believe in the impossible. As the months passed, Daniel and Emily's partnership continued to grow stronger. Their collaboration had not only brought music to those who needed it most, but also created a ripple effect that touched countless lives. The workshops Daniel led became a cornerstone of the community, offering children a safe space to express themselves and dream beyond their circumstances. Parents who had once dismissed the arts as frivolous now saw them as a lifeline for their kids, a way to build confidence, discipline, and hope. For Daniel, teaching was more than just sharing his knowledge of music. It was about passing on the lessons he had learned throughout his own life. He often told his students, music isn't just about hitting the right notes, it's about finding your voice and using it to tell your story. His words resonated deeply with the children, many of whom came from difficult backgrounds. They saw in him someone who understood their struggles, someone who had faced hardship and still found a way to shine. Emily, meanwhile, threw herself into expanding the reach of their efforts. She used her family's connections and resources to secure funding for new programs, ensuring that no child would be turned away due to lack of means. She also worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the importance of arts education, giving interviews and speaking at events to highlight its impact. Her passion was infectious, inspiring others to join the cause. Together, she and Daniel built a movement that went far beyond what either of them could have achieved alone. One evening, after a particularly long day of organizing a fundraising gala, Emily sat with Daniel in her living room. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. They had spent hours going over details for the event, but now they were finally able to relax. Emily leaned back on the couch holding a mug of tea, while Daniel strummed absent-mindedly on a guitar he had borrowed from one of his students. "You know," Emily said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I keep thinking about how much has changed since we first met." Daniel looked up from the guitar, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah? How so?" "Well," she began, setting her mug down, "when I first saw you, I judged you based on what you did, not who you were. I thought I knew everything there was to know about you because you were a janitor. But now I realize how wrong I was." Daniel smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You weren't the first person to make assumptions about me, and you probably won't be the last. It's human nature, I guess." "Maybe," Emily admitted, "but that doesn't make it okay. You taught me something important, Daniel. You showed me that everyone has a story worth hearing, and sometimes those stories can surprise us in the best possible ways." Her sincerity caught him off guard, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. Finally, he set the guitar aside and looked at her. "You've surprised me too, Emily. When we met, I never imagined you'd end up being such a big part of my life, or that you'd care so much about what I do." "I care because it matters," she replied simply. "What you're doing, what we're doing together, it's making a difference, and that's something worth fighting for." The conversation lingered in the air between them, filled with unspoken gratitude and mutual respect. Over time, their relationship had evolved into something deeper than friendship. They weren't just colleagues or collaborators. They were kindred spirits, united by a shared purpose and an understanding that went beyond words. As the year drew to a close, Emily decided to host a special celebration to honor the progress they had made. It wasn't a formal gala or charity event, but rather a gathering of the people who had been touched by their work. the students, parents, teachers, and volunteers who had become part of their extended family. The venue was decorated simply with strings of lights and handmade posters created by the kids. There was laughter, music, and plenty of food shared among friends. At the heart of the celebration was a performance by Daniel and several of his students. Together, they played a medley of songs, blending classical pieces with original compositions written by the children themselves. The audience listened in awe, moved not only by the music but by the stories behind it. Each note carried a piece of their journey, the struggles they had overcome, the dreams they had dared to chase, and the connections they had forged along the way. When the final song ended, the room erupted into applause. Emily stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her tone. "This isn't just about celebrating what we've accomplished. It's about recognizing the power of community. None of this would have been possible without every single one of you." She paused, turning to look at Daniel, who stood nearby with a proud smile. "And especially not without Daniel. He reminds us that talent exists everywhere, even in places we might overlook. All it takes is someone willing to believe and to give others a chance." The crowd cheered again, and Daniel raised a hand in acknowledgement. Though he had grown more comfortable in the spotlight, he still preferred to let his actions speak for him. As he looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who had supported him, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. For so long, he had believed his dreams were out of reach. Now, standing here surrounded by love and gratitude, he knew he had found exactly where he was meant to be. After the celebration, Daniel and Emily walked home together under a canopy of stars. The night was cool, and the streets were quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic. They strolled side by side, neither of them in a hurry to break the peaceful silence. "You know," Daniel said after a while, "I used to think success was about fame or money, that if I couldn't make it big, then I hadn't really succeeded at all." "And now?" Emily asked, glancing at him curiously. "Now I think success is about connection," he replied. "It's about touching someone's life in a meaningful way, even if it's just one person. If I can help these kids find their voice, if I can show them that they matter, then I've done something worthwhile." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's what makes you extraordinary, Daniel. You don't just play music, you live it, you embody it, and through you, others learn to see the beauty in themselves." Her words stayed with him long after they parted ways for the night. Lying in bed later, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the lonely days of his youth to the vibrant community he now called his own. He realized that his greatest achievement wasn't the concerts or the accolades. It was the relationships he had built, the lives he had touched, and the legacy of hope he was helping to create. For Emily, the experience had been equally transformative. She had entered this world expecting to change it, only to discover that it had changed her instead. Through Daniel, she had learned the value of humility, empathy, and authenticity. She had seen firsthand how small acts of kindness could lead to extraordinary outcomes, and how opening her heart to others had opened her eyes to a richer, more fulfilling life. In the end, their story was less about music and more about the human spirit. It was about two people from vastly different worlds coming together to create something beautiful, a reminder that greatness isn't defined by wealth or status, but by the courage to embrace our true selves and uplift those around us. Through their partnership, Daniel and Emily proved that even in a world divided by privilege and circumstance, there is always room for connection, compassion, and change. And as they looked toward the future, they knew their work was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and uncertainty. But whatever came their way, they faced it with the same resilience and determination that had brought them this far. Because in the end, they had discovered something far greater than success. They had found purpose, and that was a melody that would stay with them forever.